And welcome. This is the low part of the day when I do my little bit of marketing before we kick off with the substance. My name is Arnon Menon and I'm Director of the UK in a Changing Europe. And because I think we have people here who don't know what that is, just allow me a couple of minutes to explain to you what and who we are. UK in a Changing Europe is a network of academics funded by the Economic and Social Science Research Council, who are the national social science research funders. And our remit is basically to produce research-based evidence around the Brexit process, anything to do with Brexit, essentially. So we have teams around the country of academics who are working on things as disparate as agriculture, fisheries, public opinion, the economics of Brexit in its various different guises. And insofar as I'd like you to do one thing on the back of today, just if only to say thank you for the nice lunch you'll be getting later on, it's to go have a look at our website, sign up for our newsletter, look at our social media, and be in touch with us. We'd like as many of you as possible to write for us. We're always happy to have pieces for our website. We'd love to hear your thoughts about things we could be doing that we're not doing yet, things we could be doing differently. But we just want to let you know that we're there. Have a look at the website, see what you think, and don't be shy about getting in touch if you have ideas, because obviously Brexit is the massive issue of our time, and we want to get it right, and we want to show, and this is the most important part about us for me, we want to show that actually academic social scientists should be used more in the world of policy and politics, and that we can help improve debates and improve policies. Just a heads up about what we have coming up. We're launching, he's doing this from memory, which is a bad idea, I think on the 6th of June, our new series, which we're entitling Beer and Brexit, largely because I wasn't allowed to call it Barolo and Brexit because it sounds snobby. And these are going to be a sort of series of one-to-one conversations with a number of people directly involved in the Brexit process. The first event on the 6th of May is going to be with Philip Rycroft, who is Permanent Secretary of the Department for Exiting the EU. Our next event, I won't even guess the date, but it will be on the website eventually, is Nicky Morgan, and we intend to carry these on through into the autumn. So do come along to that if you want. That is all from me by way of introduction. Now it simply remains for me to welcome Owen Paterson here. Owen, as you know, is ideally placed to come here and talk about Brexit and the island of Ireland. He played a key role in the referendum campaign as a member of the Vote Leave campaign, and has also, of course, served as Secretary of State not only for Northern Ireland, but also in DEFRA, which I think makes him very qualified to talk about some of the issues around this tangled subject of Brexit, Ireland and the Irish border. I should also say, most importantly, that this is, I think, Owen's first public speech since coming back from a very nasty neck injury. He agreed to do this at very, very late notice, so hasn't prepared a lengthy keynote. He's going to make a few short remarks and then has very, very kindly agreed to take questions and discuss what he said with you. So without further ado, Owen, over to you. Thank you.
I thought you were going to make me jump now. I got these cards. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for that kind introduction. You're quite right. I only agreed to do this late yesterday morning when we heard it was coming up, and I very deliberately will not qualify, I think, for a keynote speaker. What I'll do, I'll make a few remarks, my own personal experience, and then what I hope is we'll have a bit of a discussion. I see the current dispute between the UK and Ireland with utter dismay. I've been going to Ireland for a very long time. I remember my father trying to teach me to play catch on the beach at Rush while I actually wanted to eat Tayto crisps. And in business, I was a tanner. We bought a lot of material in Northern Ireland and in the Republic, and we sold some stuff there as well. And then to move my personal history on a bit more rapidly, David Cameron asked me to be the Shadow Secretary of State in Northern Ireland in 2007, and I made it a point of going every single week to some part of Northern Ireland for 3 years. The agreement had pretty well gone through. One of the last things I did as Shadow actually was to support the Labour government in the devolution of police and justice, which is a huge step. I remember Sean Woodward calling me in and showing me a piece of paper and saying, "What are you going to do?" I said, "We're going to support it." I went to see David Cameron and George Osborne and said, "I made the biggest commitment any of your shadows will. We are going to back this." And we did. So that was a completely fascinating time. And I went to parts of Northern Ireland, sadly I couldn't go to now. And it's quite a lot of time on the border. seeing some of the Republican communities, Crossmaglen, Callihanna, but also I made a point of going over the border, meeting some of the TDs, and I went to Dublin frequently and got to know not just the government, which was Fianna Fáil at the time, but also Fine Gael, and those senior politicians were quite extraordinarily welcoming. Someone like Enda Kenny, busy and leader of the opposition, always found time to see me. And I think those visits were actually really useful. And just on the border, I remember very, very clearly, because one of the most interesting things I did in my business career was to start selling over the wall once the wall came down and communism collapsed. And going to Northern Monaghan with Seymour Crawford, who was the TD for the area, and seeing that area, which is like a salient of Southern Ireland, Republic, going up into Northern Ireland, which was completely blighted because all the roads had been blown up for security reasons, only been a couple of crossing points. And it reminded me terribly at parts of East Germany, which had been cut off by the wall, just completely blighted economy and literally wilted and were coming back. So the first thing I'd say is, from the beginning of these discussions on Brexit, it has been completely clear to me there can be absolutely no form of barrier in any shape or form. There's a complete dotty idea out there on the border that we're going to have 18th century customs officers with a big stripy pole coming down over the road. They'll be there in a cocked hat, dipping a ladle into barrels of treacle. That is simply not going to happen. It is completely, totally impractical, having seen the border. And of course, the border came up quite a lot when I was the real Secretary of State. I mean, there is as we know, it's a tax border, it's a VAT border, it's a currency border, it is a phytosanitary border, and it's very much a security border. And I wouldn't want to go too much detail on that, but the Republic very much, when we were in discussions, very much recognised the border. And we had interesting discussions of how we handled it, but they very, very much stood by the border as a security point. And of course, what was remarkable when I was it was to see the level of cooperation between basically the three main capitals involved and the two main parties. We would never, ever have had the agreement if there hadn't been the work of the two main parties in Westminster, the two main parties in Dublin, and the two main parties in Washington. And they almost seamlessly followed on and kept a continuity of policy, building on, of course, the extraordinary work of our security forces who enabled the peace process to take place by holding the rule of law. And what I saw when I came in was, sadly, there were a small number of people who did not respect the agreement and were turning back to violence. And we had to re-equip at very considerable public expense our security operation in the north. But I also saw fantastic cooperation with the south. And I went to saw Garda chief and ministers in Dublin on a fairly regular basis. And there's absolutely no doubt there are people walking around Northern Ireland today who are alive for a start, who could have been hurt without the amazing cooperation on both sides on security, and always respecting the border. So where we are today, I'm just highly alarmed at the turn this issue has taken, because I do not see that the issues of the border are a practical major obstacle. As I've just said, there is a border today. I tweeted out the weekend there was some unionist councillor who took some jolly pictures of a Garda seizure of cigarettes in the boot of a car and showed a temporary stop point on the southern side, people being held up for contravention of Republic of Ireland excise regulations. Completely legitimate, and those stops carry on the whole time. We all know there are cameras on the border now. They're of no great consequence, and nobody really notices them. Mainly because the amount of cross-traffic is very regular by people supplying absolute standard commodities. So I went to Monaghan Dairy when I was the shadow. At that time, 80% of their milk came from Northern Ireland. It's the same milk from the same farms, going in the same trucks with the same carrier on the same road to the same destination and the same phytosanitary standards. It's all done electronically. What is going to change if the nature of the tax frontier, which is the border, changes? The border is not a tax control point. Nothing happens at the border itself. Everything happens at the point of shipment and the point of landing. If you look at, 13,000 border crossings to do with Guinness, something similarly large on Coca-Cola. I remember the Queen opening a big Coca-Cola bottling plant just near Hillsborough. These shipments go every day, nearly always on the same route, in the same carriers. All this can easily be handled by the trusted traders or advanced economic operators, as Professor Gudgeon has put in his paper last week in the Policy Exchange paper. They're absolute standard procedures. We have, I think, the last figure I saw was 608 authorised economic operators in the UK. Germany has over 6,000. Well, we should start working on this fast. That's why we need to resolve this. If there are going to be practical solutions, and the head of UK Customs, John Thompson, head of the Irish Customs about a year ago, and Larson, the big EU guy who was on the World Customs Union board, they all say these problems are solvable with modern technology. And every one of you has probably got one of these things in your pocket. You can be tracked now. Google can tell you exactly where you are. With GPS tracking, you can stick one of these in a truck and follow its every movement. You don't even actually have to have cameras. So all this, in practical terms, in my view, is a hugely exaggerated non-problem. I really mean that. And in the general scheme of things, it's hugely important for the border areas, this trade, but in the general schemes of the UK and the Irish Republic, it's really quite small. So 65% of Northern Ireland sales are within Northern Ireland, 20% are to GB, and 5% south to Republic of Ireland. And the other way round, Republic of Ireland's exports, it's the same figure actually, it's 1.6% of their exports go north and 1.6% of their imports come south. So for both countries, in the totality, this is quite small economic activity. It's incredibly important for the areas where it happens. So it would be absolutely devastating for rural Ireland if there was a stupidity of putting up any barriers to trade. So I'm highly alarmed at what are political disagreements on this and the lack of goodwill. That we know Enda Kenny, before he left, had started technical discussions on the border, and sadly they were stopped by the new Taoiseach. And I would very much hope that as we get nearer, practical people will look at the facts. And someone like Simon Coveney, I worked very closely with, because when I was doing DEFRA, the Republic of Ireland had the presidency of the EU. We would never, ever have got the latest CAP round through without his drive and knowledge. And it's the pattern of things like in the Republic, which I wholly admire. You know, his brother runs a very large, successful food business. He really knew what we were talking about. So when the horse meat scandal blew up, I was on the phone at the weekend, and we worked really closely together. So, again, it dismays me to see that he is not really driving, at the moment, the need to find a practical solution, which is there. The technology all exists. And I do not see that there is a practical problem. There is a political problem. And that is going to compound things further. So, as you've just heard, I've been off for 3 months, and I've done some tweeting. One of the most unwise things I did from my bed, was to tweet a Ruth Dudley Edwards article from the Daily Telegraph, in which the Telegraph headline, which I don't actually see, was that the Belfast Agreement is past its sell-by date. That brought the whole of the Irish establishment, the Sinn Féin media operation, frightfully important people like Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson after me, as if I was attacking it. What I've always said is we need to keep revising it, as St Andrews did, and when an agreement has not delivered institutions for 25% of its term, we need to look at it in practical terms. What worries me about this issue on the border is that we know the two main parties are divided, and when I was there wasn't this antipathy between Belfast and Dublin, an increasing antipathy between Dublin and London. That is a really, really bad development. So I would just appeal to everybody to look at this issue in simple, practical terms. As someone who used to trade there for a large part of my life, and I also, in fact, as probably seen on the register, I have contacts, work with companies in Northern Ireland now, who tell me on the ground that they do not see a problem with the border. I think I can tell you actually straight that in the whole time I visited Ireland, as a private citizen, opposition politician, government, Secretary of State, and now just a backbencher again, I don't think any businessman or politician has ever told me the border presents a problem to trade. That's where we are now. I don't have ever had any discussion on it. So my appeal, and you're all immensely influential people, is to read Graham Gudgeon and Ray Bassett's paper, for instance, which shows that there are simple technical solutions which could be introduced this morning, which are being used, many of them are being used as we speak this morning. There is milk going over the border, there are shipments of Guinness and Coca-Cola going back the other way, or whatever. It's happening now. Nobody knows about it, nobody is concerned about it, and that is the way we should continue with our frictionless trade. In exactly the same way as the common travel area is completely anomalous in the general scheme of EU things, and it works brilliantly to serve the people of the British Isles extraordinarily well. And from the beginning, and as you said, I was one of the 3 MPs that helped found Vote Leave, we've said all along for Northern Ireland that we wanted to keep the common travel area from the beginning. One of the very first pronouncements we made was on that, and also to keep seamless trade on the border. So I do not see practical problems. I do see serious political problems, which are beginning to sour things in a way which I find alarming and worrying, and which need to be sorted fast. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. I have to say my primary concern at the moment is that you keep name-checking a paper by a different think tank in the first keynote, which I'm just making me very het up. I'm just going to start you off with a couple of questions, if that's okay. And the first sort of draws on your experience at DEFRA as much as anything else, and it's this. I mean, one of the points, presumably, of leaving the European Union is so that we can choose our own regulations and regulatory standards. The Irish farming sector has still very stark memories of the BSE crisis, and do you really think that they will be comfortable with a situation where British government is setting its own farming and agricultural standards and still insisting that there is no border and no checks? I mean, aren't there serious substantive issues about if we start to diverge in a regulatory manner, which gives them real cause for concern?
No, I don't think so, because the border is not a checkpoint, it's not a control point. It is just a tax point. So the current controls will carry on at the point of shipment. And
but that's because we're in the same regulatory space.
Yeah, but what I don't see, I absolutely don't see a dilution of standards in the UK, given the nature of, bluntly, Britain's urban and suburban population. I see actually strengthening of them.
But
so
it's one of the things we talk about our system, isn't it? That one parliament can't bind its successor, so you can't guarantee that. No one can guarantee that. And in that event, why shouldn't there be a genuine concern on that regulatory issue?
Well, ultimately, it's for customers to decide and customers to be content with the product if they're going to buy it. So labelling will be the absolute key to all this. But what would be the incentive for the UK to drop its phytosanitary standards? I see it actually being strengthened, because if we're going to export, for instance, dairy products to China, where I spent a lot of time trying to get exports going, there was the terrible melamine scandal. They are really, really strict, and stricter than on some European standards. So if we're going to become a big world exporter of dairy products, which I hope we will have to get our game together. Now that means we might actually get ahead of the Republic of Ireland on it.
Okay, and just one more quickly before I throw this open. You say there is no interest on either side in having a border, but you know as well as anyone that politics sometimes throws up outcomes that aren't in anyone's interest. That's just the way politics works. Now, in the event that these negotiations don't go as you want them to go, and we end up in a situation where we have to choose between either a border in the Irish Sea or a border between the north and the south of Ireland, which would you prefer to see?
Well, I touched on that. I mean, it would be complete nonsense economically to have a border in the Irish Sea when 20% of Northern Ireland sales go to GB, and I think it's about 8% go to the rest of the world, and 3% to the rest of the EU, and only 5% south of the border. So economically, it would be completely ridiculous for Northern Ireland to do that. And politically, a complete impossibility. You know, we are the Conservative and Unionist Party. We're in an arrangement with the DUP. I mean, that is the sort of thing that absolutely is inflammatory, and of course runs completely counter to the Belfast Agreement.
Okay, I suspect we're going to find that most things are quite inflammatory on this debate in a moment. But so I take that your answer as being that, therefore, in that case, you're if forced into a situation by the European Union, being unreasonable, being stubborn, being what it is, that you're choosing between one of those two borders, your choice would be north-south rather than east-west.
Yeah, there's absolutely no question about that. And the border will continue as it is now, as a tax point, but not necessarily an inspection point. And all this stuff about hard infrastructure and I mean, ridiculous talk. I mean, really dangerous, irresponsible talk about distance going blowing up facilities. You don't need them. You don't even need cameras these days. Though we all know there are cameras on the border. It can all be done with modern technology in cabs, with individuals, with electronic invoicing.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, I'm going to throw it open. Can I just say, can you keep your questions short and keep them as questions as well, please? Yes, sir.
I totally agree the integrity of the United Kingdom is non-negotiable. And that's why Bill there, so the integrity of the United Kingdom is non-negotiable. And I think what will strengthen that integrity is to have a Northern Ireland fixed link, whereas, it's been debated since the Victorian age, whereas Belfast is directly linked by bridge or tunnel to the mainland. It will certainly boost internal UK trade, be good for employment, be good for business, and it will also...
I'm sorry, we've only got 20 minutes, so is there a question? We just have to rattle along quite quickly.
And it also be good for relations between UK and the Irish Republic, as more Irish Republic exporters would choose to go via Belfast as a transpoint to the continental market. Would you agree?
Well, as I understand, there's no problem with transport. A figure I have is there's 1 million tonnes of goods go into the Republic of Ireland, and another 1 million tonnes come out. I had this figure about 18 months ago, and I've lost the source. Nobody notices, because it goes on TIR. I haven't mentioned TIR. It goes on TIR lorries, which are all checked at point of departure. I think you touched on the fixed link. I mean, if there's an economic case for a fixed link, which I haven't seen, fine. If there's no economic case, I'm very happy with ferries.
Would you... Sorry. Yeah.
No, the guy with the microphone.
Would you envisage that farmers on the border could be paid half in cap and half under a UK farm payment system after Brexit? So if the UK leaves cap, could kind of a farm on the border, would that be paid half in cap for the Republic side and half in under a new farming system?
Well, you're going to be talking quite a small number of properties. There will be a different, I hope a much more intelligent system of farm support in an independent United Kingdom. I've written quite a lot about this. I won't bore you with the details now. And the CAP will sadly, I suppose, carry on. So I'd have thought there will be a division. But that's the thing we haven't done. You can also have a derogation on the border. I mean, cross-border transport for newspapers and milk supplies and small traders. Pretty well every paper proposing this said you can have a derogation. So perhaps you could have some sort of zone. But I'd have thought it would be simpler, as we have electronic mapping now under CAP, that you pay under two different regimes. I mean, you have it near me, where I live. My house, my bottom gate's 50 yards from the Welsh border. There is a different regime in Wales and a different regime in England, and farmers cope very well with different regimes.
The head of the Northern Ireland hauliers was saying lately that tracking the vehicle is not the point. It's tracking the loads, and the loads can go hither and yon if they're not Guinness or Coke or whatever. And however electronic and trusted you have the arrangement, don't you have to check people somewhere before the end point?
No. You can look at the World Bank. The figure is less than 1% of shipments are checked. You do it on an intelligence basis, as happens now. So those pictures which we tweeted last weekend, the guards and the Republic's customs officers will have had a tip-off from someone. They didn't just happen to drop on a car full of cigarettes. And when I was there, there was this huge, vast shipment. I think it was 3 million cigarettes or something was stopped, all on intelligence basis. This idea that shipments are checked at the border is completely totally. It stopped literally in the 18th and 19th centuries. So, a point of shipment. There will be 50,000 border crossings under TIR today. Not one customs officer will stop them at a border. The shipments will have been cleared at point of departure.
The problem is I can't see beyond the first floor row.
Do you want me to go and stand up there?
Mr. Paterson, just following up from the question just had, has there been any thought given to an equivalent Shannon Free Trade Zone around the waterways, one in Carlingford Lough, say, for example, and the other around Lough Foyle? I say that in the context of Mr. Barnier last week saying that Northern Ireland is unique and it needs to be a unique answer. and Shannon Free Trade Zone has been tried and tested. And you've got, on the Loch Foyle side, an airport that isn't performing. You can make that in the context of the city of Derry. So if there needs to be sort of endpoint checks, you could have it in terms of air cargo out of the city of Derry airport. And then on the other side, you've got Warrenpoint, which is a deep water port, which could potentially be converted into sort of another free trade zone if checks need to happen.
Yeah, well, I've been entirely in favour of that. Shankar Singham did quite a good paper. I think it was the IEA, to name yet another think tank which you don't want to hear about, saying exactly that. And he went into rather more detail about a derogation on the border for very small traders, and he definitely proposed free trade zones. And I think you're quite right. I think Londonderry is basically the capital of Donegal, has been cut off from its hinterland. As a result, Letterkenny gets this massive investment because of the very sensible low rate of corporation tax which the Republic levies. And that could all be much more integrated economically. So I'd have thought that would be a good idea.
Mr. Paterson, you said that at present the Republic of Ireland sees the border as an important security point. Can you explain, I wasn't quite clear what you meant by that. Could you explain that? And also, on your point about agriculture, you were suggesting that leaving the EU might lead to increased regulation in agriculture, which seems somewhat at odds with what a lot of people expected. I mean, is that going to be a pattern in other areas besides agriculture as well?
I'll take that point last. No, I didn't make, what I meant was higher standards. Doesn't necessarily mean higher regulation. A lot of this you can do, with improved technologies. But I see if we're going to be a major world exporter of food, we're going to have to get our act together and match up to the very demanding standards of many importing countries. And I just cited the melamine scandal in dairy products in China. The Chinese are very, very wary after that, because that was absolutely shocking. So the point I make is I see it, we'll have to increase our outcomes and increase our standards, not necessarily our regulation. Sorry, your first point was...
What did you mean when you said the Republic sees the border?
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away about that. Let's just say they were very respectful of the jurisdiction of the Garda up to the border and very respectful of the Paterson north. And they were incredibly helpful. I mean, horrible things happened thanks to the extraordinary cooperation, which of course still goes on. But I wouldn't want this, what I hope is a short-term row about the border, to damage that in any way at all. But I'm afraid I wouldn't want to go into too much detail on that.
Thank you. I apologise that I came in partway through your introductions. I am not confident you've dealt with this, but it seems to me that focusing on the trade issues and transport issues of goods in relation to the border avoids the point of movement of peoples and what the border issues are for that.
Well, you might have missed my very opening comment about the way the northern part of Monaghan was blighted by what was then a very hard border during the Troubles, when all the small roads were blown up. So I am acutely conscious that you do not want to have any sort of hard border like that. And I think towards the end of my comments, I touched on the common travel area, which has been of a huge benefit to everybody right across the British Isles, which is a complete aberration under terms of EU law, and continues. And we, in Vote Leave, right from the beginning, we said we wanted to continue the freest possible movement of people, as under the CTA, and of course, goods and services as well.
Can I ask you, you seem to question the bona fides of both the Irish Taoiseach and the Taoiseach in terms of Brexit and their policies. Why would you think that the Irish government would devote so much of its diplomatic effort, a small country with lots of problems, unless it genuinely was concerned? And that is a concern shared across the island. So listening to you, it seemed to me that you don't accept that there are deep and genuine concerns, and to question the bona fides of the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of another country that has devoted extraordinary time and energy to this over the last 2 years, seems to me that in London at least, you're not really taking seriously the bona fides of the Irish government.
I hope I made it clear how I'd gone out of my way in opposition and in government to get on with the political establishment in Dublin, either in opposition or whether they're in government or not. and how, for instance, Simon Coveney, I worked incredibly closely with on the issue of CAP, and we had the horse meat scandal. What I'm dismayed at is that, having seen them work in an incredibly effective, practical manner, they don't appear to be working on the practical solutions to the border. And it's partly because we know the whole Irish establishment loathes Brexit. The Dublin establishment, all political parties, the whole media establishment, the judicial establishment, everybody hates Brexit. They don't want it to happen. And this is probably about the best stumbling block that's going to be found. And I think that the Commission have also think they've stumbled on a very effective tripwire. So whenever you hear interviews, you have senior Irish politicians talking about the UK staying in the customs union and staying in the single market. When we had the biggest vote in British history, the biggest majority in British history, to leave, to take back control. We made it completely clear that we wanted to take back control by leaving the single market, by leaving the customs union, and leaving the remit of the ECJ. So there is a collision there. And you're just getting a few voices. I mean, Ray Bassett and a few others have begun to speak out and say that the Republic of Ireland really should look to a future, a post-Brexit future, when it will be rather more isolated, it will be a net contributor by then. Figures could be significant figures about per capita spending into the EU by Irish citizens to be about what we've been doing. And if we work with the Anglosphere and we develop trade relations around the world, Ireland could be left behind, I think, which would be really sad. And Ireland should be working very closely with us because we have got these extraordinarily close economic and political relations so far. But you're laughing. I think the Irish establishment has to look at the fact that Brexit is going to happen. There was this huge vote. And instead of fighting against it and railing against it in what is quite an unrealistic manner, they should look at practical solutions. Exactly as, senior diplomat Ray Bassett in his paper with Graham Gudgeon two weeks ago.
Can I just come back to you on this tripwire idea you've just raised? We haven't actually explicitly talked about the backstop yet. Now, as I read the draft withdrawal agreement we have now, in the event that we sign that withdrawal agreement, and in the quite likely event, it seems to me, that something goes wrong in the trade talks, the British government has said that precisely what you don't want to happen will happen, i.e., paragraph 49 and 50 are there saying that basically in the event that trade goes wrong and we've signed this agreement, Northern Ireland will remain within the EU's regulatory space and inside the customs union. Do you think the Prime Minister gave away too much in December?
Well, I'd say nothing's agreed until everything is agreed. And
that's fine until March,
and
but this will be, if this is agreed.
If they try and ram that through, there will be huge opposition to it.
It's been, we've signed up to it, so I don't understand what you mean by ramming it through.
No, there's all sorts of things. They wanted that to be put into law. That hasn't happened.
So you're saying...
These are all, we all know the negotiation is going on in public the whole time, and the negotiation is not yet finished. But if that was a serious result, I don't see it getting through the Commons.
Okay. Gentleman next to you, Lizzie, just to be kind.
The reality is that the UK will be a third country come Brexit. And there's all kinds of consequences for that in terms of how the EU defends its own rights and responsibilities for its membership. So, referring to the regulatory alignment issue, can you see how that is going to work very comfortably within the context of a departed UK?
Well, we sell goods all around the world which satisfy other people's standards. So we will sell goods to the EU which satisfy their standards. And they will be controlled in the same way, mainly at the point of departure, certified, and not controlled at the point of change in jurisdiction, which happens to be a border. I really don't see a change. What's the difference between selling to Taiwan and selling to the United States of America? We sell to their standards, and we'll sell to the EU to their standards. If we don't match their standards, we won't sell there.
Yep.
Thank you. I think your observations on trade are probably very accurate because that's your area of expertise. I think where you don't seem to have a perspective is in the history of conflict in the island and the issue of sovereignty, which I think is still contested. within the context of the European Union, that facilitation of trade has been very easy. And that's why everything appears easy. The minute we're outside of the EU, a lot of that framework will disappear. And I fear that you will get possible conflict, it's a possibility. You will possibly get mass criminality of smuggling and whatever, because that will be easy to facilitate once we're outside the EU. And I think those are issues that you really do need to address.
Well, sorry, I don't agree. I mean, there's a significant figure who is in jail at the moment who had sheds straddling the border and pumped fuel both ways, depending on what the prevailing rate of duty was or the rate of exchange rate. I think under the scheme I'm outlining, with more modern technology, it will actually be harder to smuggle. Smuggling's going on the whole time. There was a huge scandal last year bringing in Chinese garlic. I think someone got 8 years for it. Smuggling in, there was a massive, I touched on it, there's this massive shipment of cigarettes when I was the Secretary of State, which was stopped. I mean, the smugglers are not going to go away, I'm afraid, but I think if we use the very latest technologies, we will make it harder for them.
I think there's a gentleman right at the back. Can I just say, if the speakers for the next session can start getting mic'd up, that will help keep things moving. Go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks very much for the contribution. You haven't said too much about the issue that when you say that we decided to leave, of course, we in Northern Ireland decided to remain. And we in Scotland decided to remain, and we in London decided to remain for that. So the notion that the British people have spoken needs a certain amount of probably follow-up, I think. So how does that factor into your suggestion that Dublin, is sort of playing politics with Brexit?
No, that's not quite right. I didn't say they're playing politics with Brexit. They hate the result because they are completely steeped in the European project. And you've seen, distinguished European commissioners like Sutherland. Ray McSharry was incredibly influential in moving the CAP towards some sort of sanity. So these have been very significant figures, and that is very important to the Irish political establishment. So I'm not denigrating that. They just hate the result. If you're from Northern Ireland voted massively for the Belfast Agreement, embedding itself in the UK, and it'll stay part of the UK until there is a very clear majority in polls to leave. There's a poll this week, 21% wanted to leave. So there's absolutely no case for the Secretary of State to call a border poll. So Northern Ireland remains subject to the consent principle, a fully fledged part of the UK, which answers partly your border question, your line in the Irish Sea. So I just, you have to look at the numbers. Parliament made it very clear. We are going to give you, the people of the United Kingdom, the right to decide in a very simple question. We are giving you that decision. David Cameron could not have made it clearer. You have the gloriously comic Project Fear, led by the Chancellor, with all sorts of ridiculous forecasts, virtually every one of which has gone the wrong way, make it very clear, very, very clear about the terrors of leaving the single market, the horrors of the customs union, etc. And there was a massive vote, 17.4 million, the biggest vote in British history, the biggest margin in British history. And my worry is absolutely genuine. I've been off for 3 months, talking to people locally, is the level of unrest and the disillusion with the integrity of our political establishment, and actually our judicial establishment, I would even say the media establishment, if this is not delivered. It will be absolutely shattering, and I think very, very dangerous. And that is far bigger than, I'm afraid, having a disagreement with our most valued neighbour. We know the Dublin establishment doesn't like it. We know the British establishment hates it. Every time the CBI pops up, whatever, they absolutely hate it. It was a terrible shock to the British establishment. What it is, it's a constitutional phenomenon. We've had referendums on endorsing Harold Wilson's so-called renegotiation terms. We've had referendums in Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland. We had a referendum on AV. And very happily for the establishment, the British people went along and endorsed the establishment's decision. This is a complete novelty. We now have the British people very clearly, by significant margin, going against the establishment. And it is the most appalling shock, as you can see every day when you turn on the radio, television, or read a newspaper. but we have to deliver it. If we do not deliver it, I really am worried about the damage and the stability and the integrity of our institutions.
There's a lady there who I think is the mic. This has to be the last question, I'm afraid. If you can keep it short, that'd be great.
Okay, you've made a number of references to the Irish government, but you haven't addressed the inability of the May cabinets to come to any agreement, and also the DUP's unwillingness to actually talk to the Southern government as well. So how do you rectify that?
Well, I've been, not like you, on the outside the last 3 months, flat on my back, watching with dismay, actually, because I don't see that the problems which are being raised are insurmountable. We've gone through this in some detail. And I did touch on the fact I'm also alarmed at the deteriorated relations between sort of Belfast and Dublin and London. You know, just as an example, to pick up the lady here, when I was there, Ireland, because it went into the euro and all the nightmare of the euro and the totally inappropriate exchange rates, etc., had this boom which went flat in its face and had a real crisis. And the European Union was pretty brutal. They put in some money, but they came to the British government and said, look, you know, these are your neighbours, you'd better help out. And also made very, very unhelpful, threatening noises about if they were going to put money into the Republic, getting the Republic to change its rate of corporation tax. Now, I'd led a big campaign in Northern Ireland on giving local politicians the ability to bring corporation tax down to the level of the Republic. And although glibly that could have damaged some Republican interests, there was never a squeak. The Dublin establishment saw what we were trying to do to try and turn around the huge overdependence of the Northern Ireland economy on public spending. When I was there, it was something like 77.6% of GDP, and get it down to some sort of sanity. And in return for that, I told George Osborne very clearly, yes, we should put in a bilateral loan, which I think was, looking back, was $3.25 billion. And the price for that is we'll tell the Europeans we will defend the Republic of Ireland's right to set its own rate of corporation tax absolutely to the last, because they will never get out of the hole if they can't trade out of it. And happily, the Republic of Ireland economy is flying, very much thanks to the fact that they maintain that rate of corporation tax. So that, I think, was a really good example of how closely we work with them. So, and again, pick up this lady's point, I am alarmed at the disagreement about this, because I do think, and that's probably the sixth time I've said it now, there are practical solutions. This is not insurmountable. But if it goes on, these political disagreements will become damaging.
Look, I would love to keep this going. I've got 5 or 6 questions I've jotted down here myself that I would love to have asked you, but I'm afraid, as ever, time has caught up with us. So can I just say thank you so much for making the time at short notice for doing this. It's been a really interesting session, and I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Right.